At 1:36 in the morning, my backyard fell into my neighbor's swimming pool. Not slowly, not after a storm, all at once. I woke up to a deep, violent crack that shook the bedroom window and sent my dog, Rosie, barking down the hallway. For 1 second, I thought a tree had hit the
This
house.
design
Then
features
came
a
a
full
grinding
outdoor
sound,
kitchen
heavy
and fire
and wet,
pit.
like the earth itself was being ripped open
Wait,
behind my home.
that looks very close
When
to
I
my
ran
property
to the
line.
back door, my porch light showed something. My mind could not understand at first. Half of my backyard was gone. The grass where my kids used to set up a camping tent had dropped almost 8 feet into a muddy construction pit. My fence was folded in half like cardboard. The corner of my deck hung in the air with 2 posts dangling over nothing. My garden shed had slid sideways and cracked open, and below it all, in my neighbor's unfinished pool excavation, a broken concrete retaining wall lay in pieces under tons of wet soil. My neighbor, Blake Harrow, had been digging a luxury pool less than 6 feet from my property line for weeks. He said it was permitted. He said the retaining wall was engineered. He said the HOA had approved the whole thing, but when the wall failed, it did not fail on his side. It took my land with it. By sunrise, the county had yellow tape across both yards.
Oh my
By
God.
noon, my HOA sent me a violation notice
Rosie,
for
stay
unsafe
back.
visible property conditions. By dinner, Blake attorney claimed my old deck posts and poor drainage had contributed to the collapse. And 2 days later, I received a demand letter saying I could be responsible for $88,000 in delays, wall redesign, pool damage, and soil stabilization. His illegal pool wall collapsed. My backyard disappeared. Then
This
he
is a
tried to blame
restricted
my
area
deck.
now.
That
What
was the
about the
moment
deck?
I understood.
Do not
This was
enter it
not
until
just a
we clear it.
construction accident. It was a cover-up with a hole in the ground, big enough to swallow half my life. Because buried in my closing documents was a recorded slope and setback restriction for the shared lot line. No excavation deeper than 4 feet could happen within 15 feet of my property without a county geotechnical review. A structural wall permit and written notice to the affected homeowner. I had received no notice, no geotechnical report, no wall permit, no warning. 3 weeks later, that restriction would be read aloud at a county enforcement hearing while Blake's pool permit was revoked. His contractor was reported to the licensing board. The HOA withdrew my violation, and the retaining wall engineer admitted he had never approved the wall that collapsed. But that night, standing barefoot on my kitchen floor, staring at the deck hanging over open air, all I knew was this: someone else's dream pool had eaten my backyard, and before the sun came up, he was already trying to make the whole my fault. I bought my house in Brookhaven Ridge 9 years before the collapse. It was the first place that ever felt like mine after the divorce. The house was not perfect. The roof was older than I liked. The kitchen cabinets had a sticky drawer that never closed straight. The upstairs hallway creaked no matter how slowly you walked, but it sat at the end of a quiet street with a wide backyard, a wooden deck, and a line of maple trees along the rear fence that turned red every October. That backyard saved me more than once. When my marriage ended, I had 2 teenagers, 1 tired bank account, and the kind of silence that follows you from room to room. I bought the house because it gave us space to breathe. My son learned to grill burgers on that deck. My daughter painted flower pots along the fence. Every summer we hung string lights from the posts and ate dinner outside because it felt cheaper than therapy and almost as necessary. By the time both kids left for college, the backyard had become quieter, but not empty. I planted hydrangeas near the deck stairs. I built raised beds for tomatoes. I put a small bench under the maple tree where my daughter used to read. Rosie, my rescue dog, patrolled the fence line every morning like she owned the neighborhood. I was not a person who wanted conflict. I worked as a payroll manager for a dental group. My life was schedules, spreadsheets, invoices, and small routines. I paid my hoe dues. I followed the rules. I asked permission before repainting my shutters. I kept the grass cut, the trash bins hidden, and the deck stained every other spring. That mattered later, because Blake Harrow moved in next door and treated the whole neighborhood like a project waiting for his money. He bought the house after selling some kind of logistics company. Within a month, he had designers, contractors, landscapers, and electricians walking around as if the property were a resort under construction. He ripped out mature shrubs, widened his driveway, added stone columns, and installed outdoor speakers so loud that even the birds seemed annoyed. Blake was friendly at first, too friendly. He had the kind of confidence that made every sentence sound like it had already been approved by someone important. He called me neighbor instead of using my name. He said, Brookhaven Ridge had great bones but needed more luxury energy. He told the HOA board he wanted to make improvements that would raise values for everyone. The board loved him. People with money can say property values and make weak boards forget how to ask questions. Then Blake announced the pool. Not just a pool, a full backyard transformation. Infinity edge. Outdoor kitchen, fire bowls, sunken lounge, stone retaining walls, cabana bathroom, landscape lighting. He showed renderings at an HOA meeting like he was pitching a hotel. I remember looking at the drawing and feeling uneasy. His lot sloped toward mine near the back corner. Everyone knew that side yard was tricky. There was a small grade change between our properties, and the previous owner had left it alone for a reason. My closing survey included a note about a shared slope restriction and setback zone along that line. At the time, my realtor told me it mostly prevented major excavation too close to neighboring structures. I asked Blake whether the pool would be close to my fence. He smiled and said everything was fully engineered. That was not an answer, so I emailed the HOA manager and asked whether Blake's project included a retaining wall near my property. She replied that the architectural committee had approved the design based on submitted professional plans, and that all county requirements were the owner's responsibility. Then the digging started. At first it was just noise. Excavators, concrete trucks, men shouting over backup alarms. Then the fence began to lean slightly. A hairline crack appeared in the soil near my deck steps. After a rain, water pooled along the property line where it never had before. I sent Blake a photo, he replied with one sentence. Construction sites look messy before they look beautiful. That was how he saw the world. Mess was temporary, beauty was expensive, and other people's concerns were just delays wearing shoes. The week before the collapse, Blake's crew poured the retaining wall. I watched from my kitchen window while workers moved forms along the excavation. The wall looked tall, too tall. It rose out of the pool pit near the fence line like a concrete cliff. I did not know enough about engineering to say it was unsafe, but I knew enough about common sense to know that a 15-foot deep hole beside a property line should make somebody nervous. I asked one of the workers whether the wall had been inspected. He said permits were not his department. I asked Blake the same question that evening. He laughed lightly and said his contractor handled all that. Then he told me not to worry because dirt moves before it settles. Dirt moves. I remembered that phrase 3 nights later when the dirt moved straight into his pool. The collapse happened after 2 days of steady rain. Not a hurricane, not a once-in-a-century flood, just ordinary spring rain that soaked the ground and turned exposed soil heavy. Around midnight, Rosie became restless. She paced near the back door. Whining at the yard, I looked outside and saw nothing but darkness and the faint glow of Blake's construction lights. At 1:36, the retaining wall failed. The sound came first. A sharp crack, then a rolling crash, then the deep grinding roar of soil tearing loose. My deck shifted hard enough to knock a picture frame off the living room wall. The power flickered. Rosie barked and backed away from the door. I grabbed my phone and turned on the porch light. The yard was split open. My fence had dropped into the pool excavation. The maple tree nearest the property line leaned at an angle. One deck post had pulled free from the concrete pier. A section of lawn, maybe 20 feet wide, was gone. Down in the pit, water and mud churned around broken pieces of concrete wall. Blake came outside wearing a rain jacket over pajama pants. For a second he just stared, then his contractor arrived and everything changed. They did not check my deck first. They did not ask whether I was safe. They started talking about tarps, pumps, and getting the site covered before morning. One worker moved toward the side gate with caution tape. Another began taking photos of my yard from the edge of Blake's property. I called 911 because I did not know if the ground was still moving. The fire department came first. They told me not to go near the deck. A county emergency inspector arrived before dawn and marked the rear yard unsafe. He told Blake's contractor not to move debris until the building department inspected the failure. That order lasted about 20 minutes. As soon as the inspector left, Blake's crew began pulling broken wall pieces away from the property line. I filmed them from my kitchen window. At 8:10 a.m., Blake texted me for the first time since the collapse. He wrote that his team believed runoff from my yard and possible instability under my deck may have contributed to the wall failure. He said everyone needed to avoid speculation until professionals reviewed the site. Speculation, my backyard was in his pool. By noon, the HOA violation arrived. It said my damaged deck, fallen fence, exposed soil, and visible unsafe yard conditions were creating an eyesore and liability for the community. I had 10 days to submit a correction plan or face fines. The manager later claimed the notice had been triggered automatically after a neighbor complaint, but at the time it felt like the HOA had looked at a disaster and fined the person standing closest to it. I read it twice because the first time my brain refused to accept the words. My yard had collapsed because Blake's wall failed, and the HOA wanted me to correct the appearance of the hole. Then Blake's attorney sent the demand letter. It claimed my deck may have been improperly supported, that my landscaping altered drainage, and that my failure to maintain my side yard may have contributed to soil movement. It demanded I preserve evidence, stop making statements about Blake's project, and prepare to contribute to costs estimated at $88,000 pool delay, wall redesign, debris removal. Soil stabilization. Engineering review, his attorney wrote, as if my hydrangeas had attacked his retaining wall. That night I sat at the kitchen table with every light on because I could not stand the darkness behind the glass. Rosie lay under my chair. The deck, the one where my kids had eaten summer dinners and strung lights after the divorce, was hanging over a pit. For a few minutes, I felt exactly how Blake wanted me to feel. Overwhelmed, unqualified, outmatched. Then I remembered the closing folder, the one my realtor had told me to keep, because hillside lots always came with restrictions. I went to the office, pulled the folder from the cabinet, and started reading. By 2 a.m., I found the sentence Blake should have read before he ever let an excavator near my fence. The restriction was attached to my survey as a recorded lot note. No excavation deeper than 4 feet within 15 feet of the shared slope line without county geotechnical review, engineered temporary support, structural wall permit, and written notice to affected adjacent owners. I read that line until the words stopped shaking. Then I measured from my fence to the edge of Blake's pool excavation using the county's map and my own survey, even allowing for some margin. The excavation was not 15 feet away, it was barely 6, and it was not 4 feet deep, it was closer to 15. That meant Blake's project was not just aggressive, it was likely inside a restricted zone. The next thing I checked was my camera footage. I had a backyard camera mounted under the deck because Rosie liked to chase raccoons and I liked knowing which one of them was winning. The camera faced the fence and caught part of Blake's construction area through a gap near the maple tree. The footage from the collapse night was terrifying. At 12:18 a.m., water began flowing along the base of the new retaining wall. At 12:47, the soil behind the wall darkened and started bulging outward. At 1:22, a hairline crack opened in the ground near my fence. At 1:35, the wall shifted. At 1:36, the entire section dropped, pulling my fence, soil, and deck support with it. I watched the clip 5 times. Then I downloaded it and saved it in 3 places. The camera showed one more thing at 6:14 a.m. After the emergency inspector left, Blake's contractor moved broken wall segments away from the collapse area. At 6:26, a worker carried off several bent metal rods that looked like rebar. At 6:41, they covered part of the exposed wall base with a tarp. That mattered, because if the wall failed due to poor reinforcement, bad drainage, or lack of proper support, those pieces were evidence. I called a structural engineer named Marissa Cole. She arrived that afternoon and would not let me step onto the deck. She inspected from safe locations, photographed the slope, measured the collapsed section, looked at the remaining wall, and asked for every document I had. When she saw the survey restriction, her face changed. She said, the excavation was close enough that Blake should have had a site-specific geotechnical review and temporary support plan before digging. Then she asked whether I had received adjacent owner notice. No letter, no certified mail, no engineer visit, no pre-construction photo survey, no vibration monitor, no request for access. Nothing. Marissa wrote an emergency memo that evening. It stated that the collapse appeared consistent with lateral soil pressure, poor drainage behind the retaining wall, and insufficient temporary or permanent support during excavation near a restricted slope area. She also warned that my deck and rear yard were unsafe until stabilized. Then I called my insurance company. The adjuster documented the deck damage, fence collapse, lost soil, destroyed landscaping, shed movement, tree damage, and risk to the rear foundation. She also told me my carrier would investigate third-party liability if Blake's construction caused the loss. Subrogation. That word had become familiar from my work managing payroll claims after workplace accidents. It meant I was not just a homeowner facing a wealthy neighbor. I had an insurance company with a recovery department. The public records request went out the next morning. I asked the county for Blake's pool permit, retaining wall permit, geotechnical reports, inspection records, drainage plans, plan revisions, site photos, failed inspection notes, and all communications about excavation near my property line. Then I checked the online permit portal. Blake had a pool permit. He had an electrical permit. He had a plumbing permit, but I could not find a separate structural retaining wall permit for the wall that collapsed. The pool plan showed a wall. The permit list did not. That was the first crack in his story. The second came from the HOA file. I requested Blake's architectural submission. The manager delayed for 2 days. Then sent a PDF so blurry it looked like it had been scanned through fog, but one page was clear enough. The HOA approved the project based on Blake's statement that all structural retaining walls would remain outside restricted setback areas and comply with county permits, his statement. Not a survey overlay, not a geotechnical review, not county confirmation. His statement. That was when I hired an attorney. Her name was Patrice Nguyen, and she specialized in construction damage and property disputes. I sent her the HOA violation, Blake's demand letter, the survey restriction, camera footage, Marissa's memo, permit screenshots, and photos of the contractor moving debris after the inspector ordered the site preserved. Patrice was quiet for a long moment. Then she said Blake had a bigger problem than he realized. Not because the wall collapsed, because the wall collapsed exactly where the documents said extra protection was required. And because his crew had touched the evidence before anyone independent reviewed it, she sent preservation letters that night, to Blake, to his attorney, to the pool contractor, to the retaining wall subcontractor, to the HOA, to the county building department. By the next morning, nobody was calling my deck the cause anymore. They had moved to a new word. Complicated. That was how I knew the truth was getting closer. The county records arrived 4 days later. At first, they looked like a pile of ordinary construction paperwork. Pool layout, electrical notes, fence barrier requirements, drainage sketches, contractor licenses, inspections, scheduling, HOA approval letter, a stamped plan page with a wall detail in the corner. Then Patrice noticed something strange. The stamped wall detail was generic. It showed a retaining wall under 4 feet high. The wall behind my house had retained nearly 12 feet of soil before it failed. That was not a minor difference. That was the whole case. Marissa reviewed the documents and wrote one sentence in her notes. Submitted wall detail does not appear to match constructed wall height, loading condition, or site-specific slope constraints. In plain English, Blake had submitted paperwork for a small wall and built something that acted like a cliff. Marissa explained that a wall holding back that much soil needed a site-specific design, proper reinforcement, drainage stone, wheat paths, and calculations based on the actual slope. Without those, rainwater did not just make the soil wet, it turned the soil behind the wall into pressure. That pressure had nowhere safe to go, so it went through the wall, and when the wall failed, it took the support from my yard with it. Then the county sent the inspection log. The pool excavation had passed an initial rough layout inspection, but the retaining wall section near my property line had been marked pending structural documentation. A note from the inspector said, "Provide engineered wall design and geotechnical review prior to backfill near adjacent property." Prior to backfill, the wall had been backfilled anyway. The collapse happened 3 days later. That was the legal turn. But the strongest twist came from the engineer whose stamp appeared on the generic wall sheet. Patrice contacted him directly. His name was Lowell Grant, and he replied faster than anyone expected. He confirmed that his office had provided a generic retaining wall detail for a different portion of the pool landscape months earlier. He had not designed or approved the 12-foot wall near my property line. He had not reviewed Blake's excavation. He had not evaluated the slope restriction, and he had not authorized his detail to be used for the collapsed wall. In other words, the engineer whose stamp Blake was hiding behind had never approved the wall that failed. Lowell sent a letter to the county stating exactly that. The temperature of the case changed overnight. Blake's attorney stopped mentioning my deck. The pool contractor stopped returning HOA calls. The retaining wall subcontractor suddenly produced a handwritten field note saying Blake had requested maximum pool width and wanted the wall tight to the fence to preserve patio space. Tight to the fence. That phrase explained the entire disaster. Blake wanted a bigger pool, so the wall moved closer. The excavation got deeper. The slope got steeper. The drainage had nowhere to go. And my backyard became the thing holding back his design until it could not hold anymore. Patrice sent the demand letter after Lowell's statement arrived. It accused Blake and his contractors of unlawful excavation within a restricted slope setback, failure to obtain proper structural wall approval, negligence, nuisance, trespass by subsidence, evidence disturbance, wrongful demand, and improper attempt to shift liability to the adjacent homeowner. The letter demanded immediate slope stabilization, emergency support for my deck, withdrawal of Blake's $88,000 claim, payment for engineering costs, restoration of my yard, replacement of the fence and shed, tree evaluation, deck reconstruction, insurance reimbursement, legal fees, and HOA correction. It also demanded that the HOA withdraw its violation because the unsafe conditions were caused by Blake's collapsed construction, not by my failure to maintain the property. The HOA responded first. They said the violation was temporarily suspended, temporarily, as if my backyard was going to grow back after committee review. Then the county issued its own notice. Blake's pool permit was suspended pending investigation. No further work could occur near the collapsed wall. The site had to be stabilized under a county-approved emergency plan. The missing retaining wall engineering had to be submitted. A geotechnical engineer had to evaluate the slope, and all disturbed evidence had to be documented. The county also referred the contractor's actions to the licensing board because debris had been moved after an emergency inspector warned the site not to be disturbed. That was when Blake finally came to my door. He did not apologize. He stood on the front walk looking tired and angry and said we both had a problem. I told him no, he had a problem. I had a hole where my yard used to be. There is a difference. The county enforcement hearing was held in a small meeting room with bad coffee and a projector that flickered every few minutes. It did not look like the kind of place where a rich man's dream backyard would collapse a second time. But it was Blake came with his attorney, the pool contractor, and the retaining wall subcontractor. The HOA sent the manager and 2 board members. I came with Patrice, Marissa, my insurance adjuster, and a folder so heavy the corners had started to bend. The county building official opened with the timeline. Pool excavation approved. Retaining wall documentation pending. Backfill performed. Rain event. Wall movement. Collapse into adjacent property. Emergency unsafe condition. Then he projected my backyard camera footage. The room watched water build behind the wall, the soil bulge, the fence crack, the wall shift, the collapse swallow my yard in less than 10 seconds. No one interrupted the video. When the lights came back on, the county official asked Blake's contractor for the engineered design of the wall that failed. The contractor pointed to the generic stamped detail. Marissa stood and explained why that detail could not apply. Wrong height, wrong load, wrong soil condition, wrong setback, wrong slope restriction, wrong wall. Then the county official read Lowell Grant's letter aloud. The engineer whose stamp appeared in the file had not approved the collapsed wall. That was the moment Blake stopped looking angry and started looking exposed. The county then asked whether adjacent owner notice had been sent before excavation inside the restricted zone. No one produced it. They asked for the site-specific geotechnical review. No one produced it. They asked for the structural wall permit matching the constructed wall height. No one produced it. They asked why debris had been moved after the emergency inspector ordered the site preserved. The contractor said crews were trying to reduce hazard. The county official said removing failed wall components before documentation did not reduce hazard, it reduced evidence. That sentence landed harder than any shouting could have. By the end of the hearing, Blake's pool permit was revoked. Not merely suspended, the county ordered emergency shoring, slope stabilization, third-party geotechnical review, a redesigned retaining system, and a full adjacent property restoration plan. The contractor was referred to the licensing board. The retaining wall subcontractor had to provide records of who directed construction in the setback area. The HOA was formally notified that my unsafe yard condition was the result of adjacent construction failure. 2 days later, the HOA withdrew my violation, not suspended, withdrawn. They also sent a correction to the neighborhood, admitting that the collapse originated from Blake's failed construction, and that I had not caused the unsafe condition. That correction mattered because Blake had spent weeks shaping the story. He had told people my deck was old, my drainage was bad, my yard was unstable, my maintenance was poor. He had made it sound like his luxury pool was the victim of my ordinary house. The correction did not make people forget what he said, but it gave them permission to stop believing it. At the next HOA meeting, the room was tense before anyone spoke. Homeowners wanted to know how the board had approved a project near a restricted slope without requiring clear county documentation. One woman asked whether her side yard could collapse next if a neighbor wanted a bigger patio. A man from the architectural committee admitted they had relied on Blake's representation that permits were complete. Representation. That word made half the room angry. Patrice stood and explained the difference between an owner saying permits are complete and the board verifying that a high-risk project near a property line has the documents it claims to have. She did not yell. She did not need to. The photos did the work. Blake did not attend. His pool remained an open excavation for months. Emergency shoring went in first, then drainage. Then temporary fencing, then monitoring pins along my yard. My deck was braced before it could be rebuilt. The maple tree had to come down because the root plate had been torn by the collapse. I cried harder over that tree than I expected. My insurance company paid under reservation and pursued Blake's carriers through subrogation. The settlement process involved engineers, arborists, deck contractors, soil specialists, fence companies, and lawyers who argued over every invoice like the hole in my yard had created a second hole in everyone's patience. Eventually, Blake and his insurers agreed to cover the damages. The documented resolution reached $173,000. That number included emergency stabilization, engineering reports, deck reconstruction, fence replacement, shed replacement, tree removal, soil restoration, landscaping, temporary safety barriers, legal fees, and uncovered insurance losses. It did not include Blake's own losses. Pool redesign, permit revocation, contractor penalties, delay costs, licensing complaints, or the luxury features he had to remove because the pool could no longer fit the way he wanted. His infinity edge disappeared from the plan. So did the sunken lounge. So did the fire bowls. In the end, the pool became smaller, lower, heavily reinforced, and nothing like the rendering he had shown the HOA. My backyard slowly became land again. The hole stayed longer than I wanted, even after the shoring went in, even after the engineers said the slope was stable, even after crews began bringing soil back one careful load at a time. I still felt nervous standing near the deck door. Your brain does not easily forget seeing land disappear where land is supposed to be permanent. Rosie forgot faster than I did. The first afternoon, the yard was safe again. She walked to the temporary fence, sniffed the new soil, and sneezed like she disapproved of the contractor's work. I laughed for the first time in weeks. That laugh mattered. The deck was rebuilt with deeper footings and new posts. The fence line was restored according to the survey. The shed was replaced. The hydrangeas were replanted. The maple tree was gone, but I planted a young one near the bench where my daughter used to read. It looked too small at first, almost silly. But the arborist told me, small trees are honest. They do not pretend to be old, they just start. Blake's house changed too. For months, his backyard looked like a construction lawsuit with patio furniture. The open pit was covered. Uncovered, braced, inspected, redesigned, and inspected again. The workers came less often. The outdoor speakers stayed silent. The black subs stopped appearing in the driveway. The HOA changed because homeowners forced it to. Any project involving excavation, retaining walls, pools, slope work, or construction within 20 feet of a property line now required proof of county permits. Engineered plans, drainage review, and written notice to affected neighbors before architectural approval. The board also created a rule that appearance violations could not be issued for damage caused by active construction failure until responsibility was determined. That rule should have existed before my yard disappeared. But some communities only discover common sense after someone else pays for its absence. I kept the camera footage in a folder on my computer. I also kept the old survey, the slope restriction, Lowell Grant's letter, the county revocation order, and one photo of my deck hanging over open air with the porch light shining on nothing below it. I did not keep them because I wanted to relive it. I kept them because powerful people are very good at sounding certain while standing beside the damage they caused. Blake was certain his pool was permitted, certain his wall was engineered, certain my deck was the problem, certain I would be too overwhelmed to challenge him. He was wrong every time. The ground told a different story. The camera recorded it. The county confirmed it. And the documents proved he had built his dream backyard on missing approvals and borrowed stability from land that was never his. So if a neighbor, contractor, developer, or HOA ever tells you a massive project near your property line is nothing to worry about, do not accept confidence as proof. Ask for the permit. Ask for the engineered plan. Ask for the survey. Ask for the setback. Ask who reviewed the drainage. Save the emails. Keep your camera running. And never let someone else's expensive dream become your emergency because you were too polite to ask hard questions. If this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Leave your thoughts in the comments, save the video, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary homeowners who learned that boundaries matter above ground, below ground, and everywhere in between, because I did not win by standing at the fence and yelling I won, because the wall that collapsed left evidence, and once the truth fell into the open, Blake could not bury it again.